Thank you, John, McKenna, and choir. Today's gospel lesson, Mark 10:35 through 45, can be found on page 823 in the Pew Bibles. Here we see yet another example of the disciples depicted as fumbling, bumbling followers who simply can't get anything right. Jesus has just predicted his passion for the third time. But James and John immediately request places of honor when Jesus enters into his glory. They don't understand that the ironic place of glory is the cross, and that criminals will hang on Jesus' right and left. You're invited to follow along as Rachel reads.
James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came forward to him and said to him, "Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask of you." And he said to them, "What is it you want me to do for you?" And they said to him, "Grant us to sit, one at your right hand and one at your left, in your glory." But Jesus said to them, "You do not know what you are asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I drink, or be baptized with the baptism that I am baptized?" They replied, "We are able." Then Jesus said to them, "The cup that I will drink, you will drink, and with my baptism, with which I am baptized, you will be baptized. But to sit at my right hand or at my left is not mine to grant, but it is for those for whom it has been prepared." When the 10 heard this, they began to be angry with James and John. So Jesus called to them and said to them, "You know that among the Gentiles, those whom they recognize as their rulers lord it over them, and their great ones are tyrants over them. But it is not so among you, but whoever wishes to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wishes to be first among you all must be a slave for all. For the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for many." This ends the reading.
May God grant us wisdom and understanding. We are in some ways daughters and sons, just like James and John, of Zebedee. But most of us know better than to make the kind of outlandish and insensitive request that the disciples make in today's text. James and John, sons of Zebedee, are self-absorbed and incredibly insensitive. "Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask of you." Can you imagine how challenging it would be for Jesus to work with such entitled people? Yet he finds polite words. He finds polite words in response. He asks, "What do you want me to do for you?" And they respond, "Well, grant us to sit, one at your right hand and one at your left hand, in your glory." I'm embarrassed for these cherished disciples. How can they make such a request on the heels of Jesus' own death prediction? Jesus has just foretold his coming condemnation, his coming humiliation, his coming crucifixion. But James and John are still dreaming of power and position, totally clueless. John Calvin writes this narrative. He says that this narrative, contains, and I quote, "a bright mirror of human vanity, because it shows that proper and holy zeal is often accompanied by ambition or some other vice of the flesh, so that they who follow Christ have a different object in view from what they ought to have." End quote. Christians aren't the only ones facing problems of vanity and ambition and other vices. Those who would lead often seek their own benefit and their own glory rather than the benefit of others. And this is true. We see this in government. We see this in business. We see it in charities, the academy, the university. And we even see it in the church. Leaders always face the challenge of aligning their personal wants, their personal interests, with the interests and the needs of the whole and the mission of the whole. Surely we aren't as narcissistic as James and John, but if we're honest, we still want the best seats in the house, am I right? We may not be upfront about our self-absorbed yearnings, our self-centeredness, but many of us scheme for those kind of privileges. It's just natural. We want our children and we want our grandchildren to have the very best. You should have seen a picture that I got yesterday. I should have posted it for you of Huddy, my grandson, in a dino outfit. Oh, just beyond adorable. We want the best for our grandkids, and I'm not blaming anybody for that. We want a lot of things for us and ours. And we want some things we wouldn't even want to admit out loud. We might not make outlandish requests, but in our hearts, we often covet the best of the lot, the top spot, the place of recognition. This is part of our DNA. It's part of our human condition. Or as Jana Childers has said, we have Zebedee DNA in our genes. James and John ask for choice seats, but they really don't know what they're asking for. Jesus politely asks them if they can drink from the same cup as he. and be baptized with the same baptism. And they're like, oh yeah, of course, Jesus. Yeah, we can do that for sure. For sure. They are eager to ease into positions of power and glory, and they have no idea. They really have no idea that the cup Jesus refers to symbolizes his blood of the covenant poured out for many. They have no idea that the baptism that Jesus refers to anticipates his crucifixion. Oh, really? You can drink from this cup? Jesus presents a stark contrast to the disciples' concept of leadership and status in the ancient world. For Jesus, a ruler, a leader, must be humble and serve others. It's a given. So if we confuse the mission of the church with always getting our way, then even our best thoughts and our best actions can be tainted with vanity and ambition. The appropriate response to our incurable tendency to put ourselves first is to be cautious and self-reflective about our motives. Why do we do what we do? What is our motivation for leading in the church, really? Henry Nouwen wrote, "Only those who face their wounded condition can be available for healing and so enter a new way of living. Our journey toward wholeness and servant leadership begins by dealing with the insecurities that drive us to entitlement attitudes and power-grabbing behaviors. Personal transformation happens quite effectively through servanthood." So Jesus was onto something here, big time. This is the way we become more like Christ. We serve, we humble ourselves, and we serve. This is the alternative way of Jesus. And this call to servanthood comes with a promise, and I quote, "The cup that I drink, you will drink. And with the baptism with which I am baptized, you will be baptized." Now, sometimes people read that, they hear that, and they think, is that a threat? Is Jesus threatening me? Is Jesus saying to James and John, you too will be crucified? Yet in the larger context of the story, Jesus' words may also be read not so much as a threat, but as an extraordinary promise. You will not always be wrongly motivated. You will not always be wrongly motivated. Rather, you will be empowered to take up your cross and humbly follow me in service to others. Now, part of what it means to serve like Jesus is to resist being dominant power grabbers who seek to, and these are Jesus' words, not mine, who seek to lord it over others. So beware of government leaders who seek to subordinate others, who seek to control others' bodies, who seek to determine who others can love. Likewise, beware of those who act as though our country is full of enemies, to be manipulated, to be ridiculed, to be destroyed, rather than seeing our country as being full of neighbors to be lovingly affirmed and served, even if we vote differently. Tragically, people's fundamental right to self-determination is under a full-throttle assault currently in the United States, and it's primarily happening through just the opposite of what Jesus is preaching. It's happening through arrogant, simplistic, oppressive, and inaccurate truth-claiming about gender and sexuality. It's all about demeaning and putting down the other. The level of violence and hateful rhetoric is alarming in our country. And faith communities, especially progressive ones, have an important role to play in standing up for the rights of all God's people. Sadly, much of the hate in America comes from religious people. That's right. Much of the hate comes from religious voices, which makes it all the more important for loving and accepting churches like MBCC to be vocal in our support of the rights of LGBTQ plus people. We have to counter the narrative that being religious, being a Christian, is synonymous with being anti-LGBTQ plus. Now, Jesus doesn't call us passively to accept violence or abuse. I loved it when our rainbow doors, after our rainbow doors had been vandalized, that our response was not hate. Our response to hate being literally carved into the doors, and they were destroyed. Our response was to put a banner together of all the different people in our church that gathered downstairs that happened to make the photo. Sorry if you missed it. Several of you didn't get in. And it said, "Love lives here." And we put that out on Peck Avenue. We put that out on Peck Avenue. That was our response. So proud of you as a church family. Jesus calls the community of faith in its life together to offer an alternative to power-grabbing tyrants and systems that seek to lord it over others. And those are Jesus' words. Today we celebrate Solidarity Sunday. This has become, at MBCC, an annual time of renewing our commitment to the kind of love that Jesus showed and that Jesus calls us to share with one another. Last month, we hosted a community gathering for LGBTQ solidarity that Pastor Jody helped to organize as a response to the vandalism. And we were blessed to hear from 5 local clergy who served on a panel of speakers: Rabbi Rebecca Yusman of Temple Menorah, Pastor Douglas Barkley of Trinity Lutheran Church, Reverend Joshua Yee, senior pastor at St. Luke's Presbyterian Church, Deacon Dick and Patty Williams from, yes, American Martyrs Catholic Church, right up here, and Reverend Rachel Nyback, rector of St. Cross Episcopal Church. We had quite an impressive panel, and you will hear in the following quotes real-life examples of religious violence toward the LGBTQ plus community in ways that those churches. Now, when I use the word progressive, I know that has all different kinds of meanings, but I meant it in the best way. And one of them kind of joked about it. They said, "Well, I never really saw our Catholic Church as progressive, but here they were advocating for LGBTQ plus rights." And so you will hear their response to the hate and how they've responded to hate with love. Rector Rachel said this, and I quote, "I think that in our day and age, it's obvious. If you pick up a newspaper or turn on the television, that Christianity has been used to berate, belittle, and shame members of the LGBTQIA community." She continued, "So I find that the demonization and the marginalization comes out in 2 ways. You can walk into a church and be told, A, you aren't welcome, right? And let me show you some scripture to tell you why you aren't welcome here. Or B, you're welcome, but only mostly. You're welcome if. You're welcome, but you need to change." She says, "I believe that's where the true damage comes. And the impact then is that there's a complete loss of trust. And not just a loss of trust in relationship, but a loss of trust with our God." End quote. Reverend Douglas Barkley shared this word of encouragement from his partner Sean as he expressed his fear in actually coming here and participating. You know, it was in the paper, and he's openly gay as a Lutheran pastor in the community. And so he expressed his fear participating in our solidarity event because it was a response to violence in our community. His partner, Sean, said, "Well, aren't you going to be there with other people?" And Douglas said, "Well, yeah, of course I'm going to be there with other people." And then Sean said, "Other clergy people?" "Yes." Are they affirming and loving people? Yes. Well, it's solidarity. That's what solidarity is for. It's not for making everybody feel that there's no potential danger, rather that we are in this together. Did you catch that? Rather that we are in this together, arm in arm, and truly companions on the journey. End quote. I thought that was beautiful. Reverend Joshua said this: we actually have flown a rainbow flag on the outside of our church for a couple decades. A couple decades. And we have several LGBTQ plus members of the community that are also members of our church, a very inclusive and welcoming congregation. But our community as a whole is very conservative. So unfortunately, we've been the recipients of violence, and the flags that we have flown have actually been ripped down probably over 8+ times just in the last couple of years, and those flags were desecrated. We definitely see that, and we feel that pain. But as my colleagues have shared, I'm still quoting him, I think even in light of those actions, and in light of what goes on, and what we are hearing throughout even our country, I'm still hopeful, hopeful that we can bridge those gaps, that we can be partners and positive allies to our LGBTQ plus community. Well, Reverend Rachel had the last word, and she said this: there are so many things we need to do to heal. Relationship is the way we need to do that. Respecting the dignity of each person, end quote. Now, I began this message this morning by highlighting how self-absorbed and incredibly insensitive James and John were. And I remarked that those who would lead often seek their own benefit and glory rather than the benefit of others. It's in our DNA. But the goal as Christians is to serve, not to be served. And if we confuse the mission of the church with always getting our way, then even our best thoughts and actions can be tainted with vanity and suspicion and ambition. Jesus has shown us an alternative way to power-grabbing tyrants and their systems that promote hierarchies of insiders and outsiders, those who are honored and those who are shamed, those who are favored and those who are referred to as vermin. The way of Jesus is the way of the cross, which is to say it's all about servant leadership. And the youth will lead the way. The children will lead the way. Just look at Henry Jones. In the case of Jesus and his disciples, following in this way led to death. And we too must be willing to bear the suffering that might inevitably come from resisting a system that's characterized by power exercised over other people, especially other people who are deemed less than, or other, or different. Reverend Rachel has it right. Solidarity is respecting the dignity of each person. Now, we might all have Zebedee's genes, and we might still have much to learn about the cup that we're called to drink and the baptism that has claimed us as Christ's own. But I am thrilled. I am so proud of you. I'm thrilled. I'm thrilled with how many of you serve. There are 127 people signed up for the Halloween extravaganza, for crying out loud. 127 volunteers. And I'm inspired by how well we are living out our welcome statement. All ages, from the adorables that sing at a very young age, how brave that is to sing in front of everyone, all the way up to the oldest witch who's going to be brewing out in front of the haunted house on Saturday. You're doing it, people, and I'm honored to be a part of the church that really cares, really loves, and humbly serves. You are inspiring me on how you live out our welcome statement. Amen.